A newborn baby had just taken his first breath. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of hospital machines and the soft cry of a child who had only been alive for a few seconds. Emily lay back against the hospital pillows, exhausted, her arms trembling slightly as she held the tiny life she had prayed for over 5 long years. The smell of antiseptic filled the air, nurses moved gently around the room, and for a moment everything felt peaceful. But then the door opened. Her husband Daniel stepped inside. His face looked calm, almost distant. He didn't walk toward the baby. He didn't ask if Emily was okay. Instead, he walked slowly to the side of the hospital bed and placed a thin folder beside her. "You should read this," he said quietly. Emily opened the folder with tired hands. Inside were divorce papers. Just minutes after she had given birth to their child, her husband was leaving her. And yet, Emily didn't cry. She didn't scream. She didn't beg him to stay. Instead, she smiled. Because what Daniel didn't know was that only hours earlier, Emily had unknowingly signed documents connected to a deal worth over $1 billion. And by the time Daniel realized what he had done, it would already be too late. Before we go any further into this story, take a moment and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel around the world. And if you're new here, click the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories that reveal moments just like this one. To understand how that shocking moment inside a hospital room became the beginning of a completely different life for Emily, we have to go back 6 months earlier. At the time, Emily Harper was 34 years old and living what most people would describe as a normal life. She worked remotely as a product designer for a small technology firm, spending most of her days sketching interface ideas on a tablet while soft music played in the background. Her husband Daniel worked in the tech industry as well, helping manage operations for a rapidly growing cybersecurity startup. Their lives weren't flashy, but they were comfortable. A modest home, quiet evenings together, weekend grocery runs, the kind of life many couples slowly build over years of shared routines. But the one thing Emily wanted most had always felt just out of reach. For 5 years, she and Daniel had been trying to have a baby. In those 5 years, there had been 3 miscarriages. Each one left Emily emotionally drained, each one making her question whether motherhood would ever happen for her. Daniel had always tried to comfort her. When she cried in the middle of the night after their second miscarriage, he held her hand and whispered, "One day we'll hold our child, you'll see." And when doctor's appointments started to feel endless, he told her to stay hopeful. Eventually, something changed. After years of disappointment, Emily discovered she was pregnant again. At first, she was terrified to celebrate. Even buying baby clothes felt risky, like she might somehow jinx the fragile hope growing inside her. But month after month, the pregnancy continued safely. By the 7th month, Emily allowed herself to believe something she had almost stopped dreaming about. She was finally going to become a mother. Friends began visiting more often, bringing small gifts and soft blankets. Emily started decorating the spare bedroom with pale blue paint and tiny animal decals along the wall. Daniel seemed supportive too. He attended doctor appointments, helped assemble the crib, and told neighbors he was excited to meet his son. But around the beginning of the 8th month, small things started to feel different. At first, the changes were subtle. Daniel began coming home later from work. Sometimes his phone would buzz repeatedly, and he would flip it face down on the table before answering. When Emily asked simple questions about his day, his answers were short. "Just meetings," he would say. "Nothing interesting." Emily tried to ignore the uneasy feeling building in her chest. Pregnancy already filled her mind with enough worries. Maybe Daniel was simply stressed about becoming a father. Maybe the company he worked for was demanding more of his time. She told herself not to overthink it. But then one evening, something happened that she couldn't forget. Emily was sitting on the couch folding tiny baby clothes when Daniel's phone rang in the kitchen. He quickly stood up and walked into the hallway to answer. At first, Emily paid no attention, but then she heard him say one sentence that made her pause completely. "Just wait until the baby is born," Daniel said quietly. Emily's hands froze over the pile of clothes. Wait for what? From that night on, Emily began noticing things she had never paid attention to before. Daniel leaving the room whenever he answered calls, new passwords on his phone, late business dinners. She wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation, but doubt has a way of growing slowly once it begins. About 3 weeks later, Emily's best friend Sarah witnessed something that made the situation far more serious. Sarah was meeting co-workers for dinner at a downtown restaurant when she noticed someone familiar walking through the entrance. It was Daniel. At first, she almost waved to get his attention, but then she noticed the woman walking beside him. They were holding hands. They laughed together as they sat down at a table near the window, leaning close as they talked. Sarah watched them for nearly 10 minutes, hoping there was some innocent explanation, but the body language between them told a different story. When she left the restaurant later that night, she sat in her car for a long time, wondering whether she should tell Emily what she had seen. Now imagine you were in Sarah's position for a moment. Your close friend is pregnant and weeks away from giving birth. You suddenly discover her husband might be involved with someone else. Do you tell her immediately and risk destroying her peace during the final weeks of pregnancy? Or do you wait until you're absolutely certain? Think about that question for a second, because the choices people make during moments like this often shape everything that follows. Around that same time, Daniel began asking Emily to sign a series of legal documents related to his company. One evening, he sat down beside her at the kitchen table with a stack of papers and explained it casually. "It's just part of some restructuring for the company," he said. "Nothing complicated. My lawyer just needs your signature on a few forms." Emily trusted him. They had been married for 8 years. She believed he was simply handling normal business paperwork. So she signed the documents where he pointed, never imagining that those signatures would soon change the direction of her entire life. Weeks passed. Emily focused on preparing for the baby while Daniel grew increasingly distant. Then one morning, earlier than expected, Emily went into labor. The contractions began just after sunrise. Daniel drove her to the hospital, dropping her off before leaving briefly to handle something at the office. Hours later, after intense labor and overwhelming emotion, their baby boy was finally born. Emily held her son against her chest, tears sliding down her face as she whispered softly, "You're finally here." She waited for Daniel to return, expecting the joyful moment they had both imagined for years. But instead of celebration, he walked into the room holding that folder, the divorce papers. At this point in the story, many people watching might be asking the same question. How could someone do this? How could a husband choose the exact moment his wife gives birth to end a marriage? If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. What Daniel didn't know was that earlier that very same morning, lawyers had finalized a massive acquisition involving the technology company he helped build years earlier. The company had been purchased by a global corporation in a deal worth over $1 billion. But because of the restructuring documents Daniel asked Emily to sign weeks before, the legal ownership of a significant portion of those company shares had quietly shifted to her name. The lawyers had planned to explain everything to Emily during a meeting scheduled that afternoon. Instead, she went into labor and ended up in the hospital before they could reach her. When Daniel placed those divorce papers on the hospital bed, he believed he was leaving a woman who depended on him financially. What he didn't realize was that Emily had just become the majority owner of the shares connected to the billion-dollar deal. Later that same afternoon, Daniel left the hospital believing he had secured his freedom and his future. He called the woman he had been secretly seeing and told her everything was finally in motion. But hours later, his phone rang again. This time it was his lawyer. The conversation lasted less than 3 minutes, and by the time it ended, Daniel sat in complete silence, staring at the floor. The lawyer explained that because of the legal restructuring Daniel himself had arranged, the controlling shares involved in the billion-dollar acquisition were now legally tied to Emily's name. The payout wasn't going to him. It was going to her. And since he had already initiated divorce proceedings, the legal consequences were far worse than he imagined. Back in the hospital room, Emily sat quietly holding her newborn son when her phone rang. It was the lawyer calling to explain everything. She listened carefully, her mind slowly absorbing the reality of what had just happened. The man who had chosen the worst moment of her life to abandon her had unknowingly handed her the freedom to build a completely new future. Months later, Emily moved into a new home and began planning a life centered around raising her son and rebuilding her career. The betrayal that once felt unbearable slowly became a reminder that sometimes the people who try to walk away from you are the same people who accidentally open the door to something far greater. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Emily's position, holding your newborn child while your partner handed you divorce papers, how would you react? Would you confront them immediately, or would you stay silent and let the truth unfold on its own? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story surprised you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next powerful story we share.